Welcome to the Leadership and Yoga podcast hosted by me, Shawna Krueger. And on this podcast, I'll be bringing you interviews with exceptional leaders in the yoga world alongside trainings and tips so you can experience true breakthroughs and help others do the same. Leadership and Yoga fam, if you are a yoga teacher, this interview is for you. And I'm incredibly excited to introduce you to Ben Kalra. He is a yoga teacher and a creative based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And before I get us into the interview with Ben, which by the way is really the most relaxing and insightful interview. So I hope that you're ready to sit back and to just soak in all of this tea chat that we have here with Ben today. But before we get into that, I want to ask you to please, if you're listening to this, take a moment to rate my podcast and to subscribe. And if you're able to, share this episode with anybody, whether that's sending it to a fellow yoga instructor friend of yours or sharing it on social, because that is the driving force that allows me to bring you interviews like this one here that we have with Ben. At the end of the episode, by the way, he leads us through a wonderful grounding moment. So be sure not to miss that. It's very, very special. Without further ado, let's talk to Ben. Ben Kalra, welcome to the Leadership and Yoga podcast. I am really excited to be chatting with you today, and I think it's so much fun when there's moments like this where a piece of your work actually just caught my eye and sparked my curiosity. And it's an honor, it's a privilege to get to hear from you off the mat and off the sort of online world of things and get to dive into a bit about who you are and your philosophy and everything that you do. So welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Shawna. It's a true honor to be here. I'm really excited. You're such a phenomenal interviewer and podcaster. So yeah, it's just a total honor to be here.
Thank you. I always call my episodes the sort of coffee chat or tea chat, and I noticed that in your bio because I'm always stalking people's bios when I go to interview them. I noticed that one of your passions or your hobbies is having tea with friends. So we'll call this like a little tea chat, and if you are tuning in as a listener, it's my hope that today really what you get to do is have this feeling of sitting down with Ben to pick his brain in a tea chat and get to know him, because it's amazing the things that you learn from just hearing other people's stories. And speaking of which, Ben, I know that the beginning of your yoga journey kind of started with this rock bottom, as you described it to me, and living a life that you really didn't identify with and sort of realizing that you were in this unaligned relationship and around people that you didn't necessarily want to be like, and you had this realization. And I wanted you to start by just taking listeners to that moment, to the point where you found the opening for all of the practices that you do today.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. Welcome to the tea chat, everybody. I got some matcha right here in my mug. So yeah,
Cheers.
pour up a tea, cheers. And I think I like talking about this topic because for a lot of us, I feel like there was some sort of traumatic event or period of life that maybe brought us to yoga or maybe brought yoga to us. And maybe for others, yoga might have just matter-of-factly found us and we're like, okay, this is cool, let's go with this. And for me, I think it was a little bit of both. We can rewind to when I was 20 years old and I was in college and I was in this stage of my life where I was struggling to find connection. And at that point in life, a lot of the connection that I felt with myself and my body, and even a lot of the therapeutic benefits that I felt were from physical movement, from exercise, from sports, athletics, and running. And it was around that time where I ran a marathon, and I should have dropped out of the marathon around like mile 7 or 8, but I had an ego, as I still do, and I guess I just wanted the shiny medal, and I ran the remaining like 19 miles of that race on a bum knee so that my ego could be happy. And I broke down when I finished the race, and it was a very powerful moment, but at the same time, that kind of had permanent effects on my body, and my body started to break down at 20 years old, and I could no longer do the things that were therapeutic for me anymore. And so, to rewind even more to year zero, I am the son of an Indian man from India who grew up in Southern Africa, and a Jewish woman who was born in Brooklyn, New York, and grew up in New York. And it was actually my mom, the Jew from Brooklyn, who recommended meditation to me at this period of my life when I was 20 and I was struggling because of having physical injuries and just not feeling a connection with myself. And I started meditating. I started doing guided meditations, and it was very good for me. I'm not going to say that it was immediately life-changing, but at that point in my life and in the 20 years up to that point, I had kind of developed this agnostic and realist view of the world where I didn't believe in much when it came to spirituality. Um, the meditation practice showed me that there was something else out there. There was something in the realm of a higher power, or whatever words we want to use to describe that. But instead of being tied to a religion, it was more so tied to the universal collective consciousness of things. And that
Mm-hmm.
resonated with me a lot. And so I didn't really have the vocabulary or the words to describe what I was sort of discovering, but I stuck with it on and off in this meditation practice. And the rock bottom moment that you kind of described didn't come for another couple of years. So that came when I was 22,
Mm.
graduated from university. I'm working an office job. I'm in a new city. Um, all of my friends had moved away. My closest family was 8 hours away. I was in this relationship that wasn't serving either party. And so really like life was fine, and I want to make sure that I don't like complain about things because how privileged, to like have a job and to have an apartment. Granted, it was like a 400 square foot shoebox, but that's a blessing, to have somewhere to live
Yes.
and to have a job that I can use to pay the rent. But at the same time, I think it was just this total lack of connection that I was feeling. Like, sure, I had this inconsistent meditation practice, but outside of that, there truly wasn't anything that was bringing me any sort of joy and connection. And I've been depressed my whole life. It's not something that was new to me, but that deep of a hole and that deep of a darkness
Yeah.
was new to me. And so, yeah, there are very dark moments, but luckily the world showed yoga to me, and I very quickly developed a very devoted practice. So I began going to classes every day, and then I would go home and continue my practice at night because I lived in a very tight body and I wanted to be able to do more of the poses.
Yeah.
And very quickly, this yoga practice became something that gave me something to really care about. And I've always had so much creative energy and so much passion and so much zest for life, but I think that was such a dark place for me because at that time I had nowhere to put that energy. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
and I felt almost like a champagne bottle that you shook up but you like can't pop the top, or I felt like an instant pot that
I
you
know
like
that
before you like.
feeling. Yes.
Yeah, I was just like, I feel like I'm gonna explode, but I have nowhere to even explode to. So I feel like I'm exploded inside of my own body, and it's just, um,
Yes.
it got pretty dark. But then I think looking back, I can have such gratitude for that period of life because I've learned that everything works in polarities, and
Mm-hmm.
to any amount of darkness, there exists an equal and opposite light. And we might not be able to experience those things at the same exact time, but those things are both existing, and without one, there can't be the other. And often we're kind of just fluctuating in the space in between. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think now, we can fast forward. I'm 28 now, and um, I've been teaching for the last 6 years and stayed super devoted to my practice. And um, I can be so grateful for that period because having experienced lots of periods of darkness and depression, as many of us have, it gives
Yeah.
us such great context to pull from when it comes to our practice and when it comes to teaching and guiding others, because life is hard and everybody has their trials and tribulations, whether they relate to, family or work or raising kids or, mental health or relationships. Like, we're all going through this because the world that we live in is very flawed and challenging to live in. So I think as a teacher, at this point, being in a little bit more of a steady stage of life, I'm grateful for that darkness because ultimately yoga is the set of practices that helps us liberate ourselves from suffering. And to know suffering so well has been hard,
Mm,
but it gives me greater purpose in doing what I do.
yeah. And I'm curious too, because if I've understood the timeline right, you had the awareness of the meditation and you had the recommendation from your mom and you had done some guided meditations. And then the feeling of the real rock bottom and the feeling like the champagne bottle that was mixed up and you didn't have anything to do with this creative energy, that comes after, right? So you had sort of the knowledge of the meditation, and in a way, that came first for you. Is that right?
Yeah, the meditation came first, and it was a couple years later that I even did my first like physical yoga asana class.
Yeah.
And when I took that first yoga class and then kept taking more classes, um, it was like 10 light bulb moments every time because I had this from my previous life, I had this love for em embodied movement, sports,
Yeah.
athletics, running. And then I also had developed this enjoyment of meditation and this kind of open-minded way of looking at spirituality and faith and even the idea of God. And so when I started doing the physical yoga practice, that just combined those two passions and it just made so much sense. And I
Yeah.
also was having this feeling of, oh, I did something physical in my body and I actually felt better afterwards instead of feeling worse, because at that point I couldn't go play pickup basketball because I'd feel terrible afterwards. I couldn't run. I still
Yeah.
actually can't run because of injuries that I sustained while finishing that marathon. And so
Wow.
it was really powerful to do this yoga practice and feel better afterwards. I think a lot of people maybe experience this when they start a yoga class, and I think this is why it's like a cliche thing to like start weeping in pigeon pose, is because
Yes.
we start to feel these things that we haven't felt because we had no tools to feel those things, or we didn't know the practices through which we could feel things in that way in our bodies. And so that was very powerful for me, and that's what just kept me coming back. Um, and so I have this equal love for the physical yoga practice and the spiritual yoga practice.
And on this topic too of keeping coming back to your practice and sort of finding that sense of purpose in your practice to feel things that you may not have been able to feel before or are no longer able to experience in other areas of your life due to injuries and sort of the speed bumps that we all have. I want to ask you about what you feel the purpose behind your yoga practices. And a lot of times I think that at the root of a purpose, there's sort of a question that we're trying to answer. And I was wondering if that resonates with you. Is there a question that you feel that you're trying to answer with your yoga practice? And by yoga, of course, we include everything, the meditation, but what would be this sort of question in your mind?
That's a good question. I no, no, there's not. And I think the reason is because yoga is such an open-ended, open-sourced set of practices, and there are so many different reasons why one might practice, and there's so many different reasons why I practice. I practice to feel good in my body. I practice for spiritual liberation. I practice to become more flexible. I practice to
Yeah.
feel strong in my body. I practice to try to be a better person in the real world, to try to be a better friend and a better partner and a better dad to my two cats, and to try to find this connection with nature that I feel like I missed out on for a period of my life. So I think the answer is no and yes because there's not one specific question that I can think of, but depending on the day, there might be a different question I'm seeking to answer.
Yeah.
Today, in my morning practice today, I practiced outside for an hour or two, and the question that I was seeking an answer to was how can I ground myself to be present for this interview? And tomorrow I'll have a different question because I'm not being interviewed tomorrow. And
Exactly.
I think that way it's really cool that yoga is malleable in this way and can fit into,
Yes.
and that's the exact reason why yoga is for everybody.
Yes, I love that answer. And I think you essentially allude to the point that yoga isn't just one additional thing that we need to add in. It's sort of the lens and the integration of it all. It is for you today, whether you are being interviewed or whether you are just hanging out with your two cats. So that is a good answer. And the thing about it is that in this first part of the interview, when I'm always talking about people's stories, and it's so easy that we can get so lit up and so inspired and feel like, you know what? I am going to do it. I'm going to get on my mat. I'm going to start my yoga practice, or I'm going to become a teacher and this and that. But in your experience, what really made you, what moment was it that you realized that, wow, this has become a part of my life? This is now not something that I have to make a checklist, or, I don't have to necessarily think about it. It's just become part of what I do.
It's a good question. I think it's still an ongoing challenge. The human mind is so flawed. I feel that every day. And every day I still notice, oh, I'm not breathing. I'm holding my breath. I should probably stop doing that.
Oof.
Or,
Yeah.
I'm having a pretty judgmental thought about myself or someone else or whatever. That's that's not very aligned with the principles of yoga. And so I think I'm just in a constant flux of how can I allow this to weave into the essence of my being, which is really the teachings of classical tantra, tantra meaning like to weave, weaving the sacred with the mundane, and getting our practice to not just be this thing that exists in a vacuum when we're on our yoga mat, but this thing that is like the wind, you know, this thing that is weaving in and out of our spirits and every thought that we have and every action that we have, and releasing any need to like be perfect and to be this like yogic saint, because we're just flawed people in the modern world, like we can't expect ourselves to be a bunch of swamis, unless that's the renunciate path that we want to choose to go down. But the majority of us are householders living a regular life with a lot of responsibilities and a lot of insecurities and a lot of personal challenges. And so, yeah, yoga's always with me. And it's, to be honest, it's like all I think about. Every day I feel like I'm more obsessed with this path. And at the same time, I feel like I'm so far from being at the point where I'm like, I am yoga, like,
Yeah.
um, I think I'm excited to see where the next, like, 3, 4, 5 decades go. I'm excited. I would never wish time away, but I'm excited to be, if the universe will have me as an old man, if I'm privileged enough to reach old age, I'm excited to see where the practice will lead over the course of that. Because all I can do now is, I've been practicing for all in all like 8 years, and teaching for 6, and I started teaching pretty soon after. I just had that fire and I was like, this is the path for me, this is what I care about, and I feel even more like that now than back then. And all I can do now is practice, right? Like, and there's kind of like liberation in that. It's like we practice and then we release the rest. That's Yoga Sutra 1.12. If anyone wants to look that up, that's my favorite Yoga Sutra, which is
Thank you.
practice and non-attachment, abhyasa and vairagya. And so basically what it says is practice and do your best, but then also at the same time immediately let it go, because there's no point in being attached to the results of our practice.
Yeah, it kind of begs the question of this idea of devotion, and I love how you phrase it. If the universe will have me to keep practicing this, it's like I've heard people say before too, like just give me another month, give me another year, give me more time with this, because I'm so fired up on this right now, and I don't know exactly where it's leading, but I'm I'm honored every day that I get to wake up and keep working on this path, essentially. So take us into, you started teaching, and I know you had sort of an overlap between when you began teaching and you were still working your 9 to 5, I believe, and this was the turning point of getting to you to be where you are today. When did all of that start?
Yeah, that was a a fun little period of life, and I say fun with a little asterisk, but yeah, I was that person who, as soon as I finished my yoga teacher training, I think I had just turned 23 at this point, and I immediately started teaching at the studio I trained at. They had like some open 6 a.m. classes that nobody wanted, so I plugged into those and I was making like 12 bucks a class because we were getting paid like, or at least I
Woo.
was getting paid like $2 a head, but I was like, let's go, like I don't care, I was
Yeah.
just so happy to be teaching, and so I would go in and teach a 6 a.m. class and then go into the office and I would bring my big yoga mat into the office with me, and then I would go take a class at 12 because there was a little gym with a good yoga program next to the office, and then I would go back to the office and work, and then I would either go take another class at night, or I would sub a class, or just like do something yoga related. So um, it was this stage of really kind of hustling, and being in your early 20s, you kind of have the energy for that. And at the same time, I was also building my photography career. I'm a photographer by trade as well, and
Hmm.
this is when I was trying to get things off the ground with that. And I was also working as a social media manager part-time. And so it was this stage of life that was just kind of crazy where I wasn't sleeping much, but I had so much motivation to change the way my life looked that I didn't really
Hmm.
care what it took. I was like, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to change the trajectory of my life, because I all the people I worked with were totally fine, super nice people, very grateful. I've worked on a good team in my first job out of college, but at the same time, with all due respect, I didn't see my life going on the path that I saw theirs, and a lot of these people had been at the company for 20, 30 years, and I think that's what led to me being in a dark place at that point because I was so terrified that life could manifest in a way that felt so unaligned with what I would like to see for myself. And so I think in this way, like a little bit of agitation, and we talk about contentment a lot in yoga, right? Like santosha, but
Yeah.
I think a little bit of discontentment isn't a bad thing because if we're just content all the time, then nothing changes and we stay in the same place, which is totally fine if
Yes.
you are exactly where you want to be, right? But a lot of us
Hmm.
aren't quite where we want to be, and so I think it's okay to be discontent, but we have to use that as our fuel to then, be a little bit agitated to enough to change something and to change our reality. And so
I love
I just
that.
kind of let myself be in that phase of life, which was really hard, but I knew it was temporary and it lasted a few years. Um, and then eventually, we become better at the things we do. I became better at teaching yoga, and I became a better photographer, and I found my footing in the new city, which I'm still in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been here for
Mm.
um, 7 years now, and yeah, eventually things just kind of worked, and I was able to leave that job on really great terms with a lot of gratitude for what that job provided to me, which was stability uh, and an ability to invest in yoga trainings and explore these other passions of mine. And yeah, that's kind of the story of that.
I love that the way that you just phrased that it's okay to feel the sort of moments that we're not content, the discontentment. And I feel like a lot of times we try to bury that away and like shove that away and I don't know, get
Good
back
vibes
and get
only, right?
get yeah, good vibes only, like push it all down, but it all has the meaning that we give it. And you chose to give it a really powerful meaning, which is that okay, this is a true sign that I don't want my life to go in this direction and I'm going to do something big and uncomfortable about it. That also may make me feel a little bit not content yet, but I'm going to trust in that path of evolution rather than in the path of pushing down the feeling in the first place. I think that's a powerful, really powerful reminder. And on this subject of the evolution and continuing of your crafts, I know that you did a 300-hour afterwards that was incredibly impactful for you in terms of continuing to deepen. I think you said something like that you thought that you knew that yoga was this really deep, profound thing, but you really didn't have any idea yet. It was like the more you know, the more you realize you actually know nothing.
Precisely, which is why more than ever, even more now than like 5 years ago, I truly feel like I know nothing. And that keeps me so excited. Like I'm so excited to continue to learn more because I know that there's just an incredible amount of things out there that I have no idea about. But yes, I did a 300-hour training about a little over 2 years ago now, and yeah, at this point, I was already very deep in my practice. I was still practicing every day. I was teaching like 15 classes a week, so I was really in it. Um,
15.
and I was thirsty for more, yeah. And for a while, I was teaching like 10, 12 classes a week, even with all these other jobs and stuff.
Wow.
But it was a privilege to be doing so. And at this 300 hour, that is where I met my teachers. I'm very grateful to have had very good teachers for my 200-hour initial yoga teacher training. And they gave a really well-rounded education. Like my 200-hour was not like in a specific lineage. It was more like a 101 course of the broad view of the totality of yoga. So we got a little bit of insight into a bunch of different lineages and ways of practicing. My 300-hour program is where I got to experience the feeling of yoga. Um, it was living this life of getting up every day and starting our mornings with meditation and pranayama and mantra chanting, followed by a thorough asana practice, followed by philosophy discussion. And so it was the experience of living and breathing yoga that um, can be hard to experience when we have all of the distractions and responsibilities of everyday life. So, yeah, I was up in Northern California for 5 weeks, and um, I'm grateful to have teachers that I feel like the majority of their wisdom comes from just being very deep in their practice. And what I learned from these two individuals was not anything that could be written in a textbook or written in a manual. I didn't learn, I've learned much more about like sequencing and cueing and the technicalities of teaching yoga, making a playlist. Like, I learned a lot more about that stuff from other teachers, but from these teachers in my 300 hour, I learned what it really means to be devoted to the path of yoga, what it really means to take on the dharma of sharing this practice, what it really means to equip others with the feeling deep inside of them that they can pull from in order to show other people what yoga is. Because I love talking about yoga. It's my favorite topic, as I know it is yours as well. Um, and we can talk about it all day, and I will happily talk about yoga all day. However, yoga is something like the true essence of yoga is something that cannot be described with words, and to even try to describe it with words is doing it a disservice. And so it's really something that can only be felt, and not felt with our minds and not felt with our bodies, but felt with that deep essence of the self that we might call the Atman or the Purusha, or the Drashtu, the seer, or all of these words in Sanskrit that mean like the self with a capital S, or the soul, or the inner consciousness. That's what we're really seeking in our yoga practice, and I feel like that's what I got to experience during this 300-hour immersion with my teachers. And I got to see people that I saw myself in. They were just 20 years ahead of me. So it was beautiful that like, and my teachers are just regular people. Like, we could sit down and just have a tea with them and laugh and make inappropriate jokes and whatever. So they're so down to earth. They would never ask to be put on any sort of pedestal, but at the same time, in my mind, I would kiss their feet because I know and I respect from the bottom of my heart how much they have poured into this path of teaching and sharing yoga. I know that they've led yoga teacher trainings and lost money on them, but they did them anyway and didn't cancel the training because they believed in what they were doing. And
Yeah.
that's what I was seeking, because at this point in my life, I would do the same thing.
How
So
do you
lots of
know? Yeah, I was
gratitude.
going to ask you that. A lot of people want to find their people, right? And find their teachers. And there's so much noise and there's so many things grasping for our attention and announcements and recommendations, even. But how do you know kind of where, first of all, where to go looking for your teachers, and then also how do you know when you've found them?
It's a good question and not easy to do. I've actually had some people in my DMs recently who are looking for a 200 hour and like, how do I find a program? Because there's literally a million of them. And I'm like, yep,
Yeah.
there are. And there's a lot of amazing programs out there. There's a lot of programs that maybe lack something but are really strong in another thing. There's programs that maybe don't touch on the philosophy, but they'll give you such an amazing education in the sequencing and the alignment and stuff, and then vice versa. I think my advice would first be like work within your community and try out different studios and ask around and tell people you're interested in training and who should you study with and go take classes with because that's what we have and that's what we have most immediately available to us is the people in our communities, and it's always very, especially if you see yourself remaining in that town or city for years to come, it's so meaningful to build those connections in the place that we physically live. Even in this interconnected online world where you can connect with anybody in any country, having that connection with our immediate surrounding community is very meaningful. So that's option one. But sometimes, and for me, this was the case for my 300 hour, is, Charlotte's just a medium-sized city, so I wasn't able to find the perfect program for me here at home. And I really took it seriously choosing who to study from. I knew what I was looking for in a program, and it wasn't immediately accessible to me. So I know I had to go somewhere else, and I was willing to use the time, energy, resources to make that happen. And so I feel like I honestly probably looked at the website for like damn near every single 300-hour yoga teacher training that existed. Like I was so thorough in my research. It was such a task, and I had a good handful of phone calls. I kind of like selected maybe 5 or 10 programs that the curriculum was in alignment, the background of the teacher was in alignment, and that the energy of the program felt like it could work for me. And so I had phone calls with them, and it was the call I had with my teacher Gloria, where I was like, "Yeah, we're on the same vibe." And it was less about like, how can I find the most experienced teacher that has the most credentials or whatever it is, but more so, how can I find the program that resonates with me on a deeper level, and how can I learn from people who I can see myself in and who I would like to grow on a similar trajectory as what they're offering.
Yes.
And what was very important to me as well was finding a program that said something about social justice or said something about yoga being a practice of liberation or activism, because that's very important to me in my off the mat values. And so when it came to choosing teachers, I was like, they have to at least, they don't have to be like a full time activist, but they at least have to be someone who sticks up for people and someone who is a voice for change. And
Yeah.
that was a big conversation of with the school that I ended up enrolling in.
I love that. And that's something that I feel like even just following that gut instinct, that knowing that this is super important to me will also help guide you to wherever you're meant to be in this case. It worked out really well for you on many different levels. And I'm curious, beyond just the certification and the trainings, what has really helped you grow as a yoga teacher? And almost everybody answers this as just experience in teaching, right? And just getting out there and doing the thing. But I'm wondering if, even if that is the case, I don't know what your answer is going to be, but can you try to take us to some tangible things that have really have made an impact in the way that you're able to show up as a teacher?
Yeah, of course, just trying to stay as consistent in my own personal practice as I can is a big thing. And the second thing is remaining a student forever and always and continuing to study. Not just taking classes with other teachers, but taking trainings. And, I kind of view my personal training and education in a few different buckets. Like I had my initial 200 hour, and I did a few other trainings around that period when I was newer. I had the 300 hour, which is where I kind of felt the depth of these practices, especially when it came to the philosophy and the lineage and the tradition of yoga. And then now I'm studying a lot of Katonah Yoga. So I'm studying something completely different. I'm not, I do still study in the lineage of my teachers for my 300 hour, but
Can you
I'm
share a little
studying.
bit about Katonah Yoga?
Absolutely, yeah. So Katonah Yoga it's always a funny thing trying to define or describe Katonah Yoga because it's this thing that can be described in a lot of different ways, but to try to say it simply, it's a style of hatha yoga that's been being developed over the last 40 plus years, and was founded by a woman named Naveen Mishan, in New York. And it's a hatha yoga practice that draws a lot of inspiration from many different types of yoga and spiritual practice, but draws a lot of inspiration from Iyengar yoga, in terms of alignment and how to organize the body. It draws a lot of philosophical inspiration from Taoism, ancient Chinese philosophy, and traditional Chinese medicine. It utilizes sacred geometry a lot in terms of how to organize the body in space. And
Interesting.
the goal of Katonah Yoga is often said to be joy. So, whereas the goal of yoga in a more traditional or classical sense might be more tied to spiritual liberation or awakening or enlightenment or any of these words that we might use, whereas the Yoga Sutras might say, like, stilling the turnings of the mind so that the soul can kind of abide in its own nature. Katonah Yoga is a little more practical, in that the goal is joy and the goal is living a good life and the goal is coexisting really well with others. And in a Katonah Yoga room, you'll likely hear lots of metaphors, a lot of the teachers have other things in their life that they're equally passionate about. And so you might take a class with a teacher who's also a musician, and they might talk about music just as much as they talk about yoga, because really yoga can be related to music in a
Everything.
very, yeah, in
Yeah.
everything, music, dance, cooking, baking, anything is a metaphor for the things that we experience in yoga. And that is really emphasized in the Katonah Yoga practice with the goal of making things more universal and less personal. And through metaphor, things become more universally understood. Whereas if we just speak in like the language used in the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita or whatever, yoga can seem like this thing that's a little bit far away or not as practical. But when we use and relate yoga to the things that we do in our everyday life, it becomes a little bit more available to maybe understand and relate to the goals of the practice. So, in this way, Katonah Yoga was very different than all the kind of uh, styles of yoga that I had immersed myself into prior to that. And that's why I love it so much, because it gives me a perspective that's so different than the things that I'm already also studying and practicing. And it's helping me become a lot more well-rounded and more spherical. And I'm really enjoying studying Katonah Yoga. So I'm learning from a lot of different teachers. My main teacher is Abby Galvin up at their studio called The Studio in Soho in New York that I go up to, and I'm able to collaborate with them and do some photos for their studio and study with them. And yeah, that's kind of the primary place that I'm learning from right now. And yeah.
So, was this turn to Katonah Yoga at all related to? Because I'm thinking about your time at the silent meditation retreat in Rishikesh and kind of the realizations that you had around joy and whether something is the destination or it's actually just a tool. Was that at all related? Or was it almost, nothing's by coincidence per se, but it was something else that popped up rather randomly for you?
Yeah, I suppose they're separate but also related, and I kind of think of it like gravity. Like, I think as we go through life, everything is a little bit connected. And when I was in India and, doing that silent retreat, as you mentioned, I had already begun my Katonah Yoga practice, and I had already
Ah, okay.
attended an immersion or two. But obviously at that time in India, I was more tapped into the kind of traditional Indian lineage and ways of doing things. But yes, and to share a little moment from that silent meditation
Yeah,
retreat.
take us there. I think it's really powerful. I've heard a bit of the story, but I'd love to hear it all again.
Sure. Yeah. So this was a year ago. About a year ago, I was in India for about 5 weeks, and it was really during my 300 hour another year prior that I was like, okay, I have to go to India. I have to make this happen. And the reason is because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm Indian and my grandmother's still alive and kicking it, and she still lives in New Delhi, and I don't get to see her that often, and she's still very with it, she's got the sharpest mind, and I really wanted to make sure I got to go visit her and gave her the chance to kind of show me her life in India, while she's still so like present and sharp. And so um, during my 300 hour, and my grandfather's name is Om, and I say that, and he passed about maybe like 12 years ago, and I say that because we were spending so much time chanting mantras and stuff, and almost
Mm-hmm.
every mantra in the Sanskrit language, like it uses Om as like an invitation. So Om is either at the beginning and the end of the mantra, or it's at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of the mantra, or maybe it's common to chant Om before you start chanting the mantra. So I was just feeling such a deep connection to my ancestors, and specifically to my grandfather Om, who never got to see me walk down this path, and I think he would have been
Wow.
proud. But all that to say, that's why I was like, I'm going to India, and I have to make this happen. And so I spent a couple weeks with my grandmother in Delhi, and that was really a wonderful experience. And I got to see how in Delhi there is the ultimate organized chaos. You don't go to Delhi and see a bunch of yoga studios and see a bunch of people doing Warrior Two and Crow Pose. But what you
No.
do see, what you do see is a bunch of temples, and you see people very devoted to their spiritual practice in a different way through prayer and through
Mm-hmm.
what we might call bhakti or devotion. And uh, living in Delhi for those couple weeks at my grandma's place was just really good for my soul as a person and as a grandson and as a family member and as a person. And then I went up to Rishikesh and at the foothills of the Himalayas, and I stayed at a couple ashrams. And this one ashram I stayed at, we were doing a week of silence practice leading up to Mauni Amavasya. And Mauni Amavasya is known to be a very auspicious day to practice silence. I think it falls on the new moon of the Magha month of the Hindu calendar, and Magha is
Mm-hmm.
like around March or February every year. And so they do a week of silence leading up to Mauni Amavasya, and the word for silence in Sanskrit is Mauna. And so
Mm-hmm.
we were doing this silence practice, and we were meditating for like 4 hours a day, but it was split up into like meditating for like 45 minutes or an hour at a time, so it's a little more manageable. And at this point, I'm pretty into my yoga and meditation practice, so I'm kind of ready for that. And I'm also a pretty introspective and introverted person, so silence for me isn't necessarily as challenging as it is for some people who might be more extroverted and who might feel more of a need to use their voice more often. But I was really enjoying it, and there kind of reached a point, maybe about two-thirds of the way or three-quarters of the way through the silence retreat. We were on the back half of it. It was February in northern India, so it was cold and it was raining, a bit throughout the week. But we had this day where the sun was coming out and the weather was so nice. Like I was able to take off my jacket finally. And it was time for all of us to go into the meditation hall for an hour of meditation. And I was like, I'm not going in there. Like the sun is shining. I'm not going inside. I'm not going underneath a roof into a dark room. And I don't want to make it seem like it was a dark, sad. It was a beautiful room, but it was
Yeah.
just shaded and and inside. And so um, I took my shoes off and I took my socks off and I put my feet in the grass, and nobody else was outside because they were all either meditating or the staff was maybe getting ready to serve lunch afterwards. And I put in my headphones, even though we weren't supposed to wear headphones because that's a distraction, right? That's just more vrittis, more fluctuations of the mind. But I didn't care. I was like, I want to listen to music. I want to dance, even though I can't dance and I probably look stupid. Um, and even though people might ridicule me or say, oh, what's this fool doing? He's not meditating. And I'm like, I revere this practice just as much as anyone on this property, but for me to actually feel the essence of my spirit, I need to dance in the sun right now. And it was a really good lesson to me that meditation is amazing. I highly recommend it for everybody. And if the purpose of our meditation is just to meditate for the sake of meditating, then I'm not sure we're getting the most out of that practice. And again, this is different if someone wants to be on the renunciate path or wants to become a monk or a sadhu or something like that. But for me, who's just a regular person in the regular world, um, I was like, I don't think I need to be meditating for 4 hours a day. Maybe 1 hour, maybe even 2 hours. But when it comes to meditating for 4 hours a day, there are different ways for me to integrate my spirituality into the way that I am living in the world. And there was a lot of liberation and freedom in that. And I think yoga should never feel like something that is constricting, and it should never feel like something that we have to do. And of course, I fully respect the protocols at this ashram, and I respect any ashram for being one of the few places in the world that really tries to prioritize the yogic way of living in every way. That's very respectable. And if someone came up to me and told me, "Hey, can you stop doing this? You're distracting everyone. Can you sit and meditate?" I'd probably say yes. But in that moment, that's just what I needed to do, and that's what those hours of meditation told me, is to go dance in the field. That's your meditation. And I think when the meditation is working, it guides us, and it's like gravity, right? It's another form of like gravity, like wind, as I spoke to earlier. It becomes less of an analyzing of what should I do. Oh, I should go sit in the meditation room because it says on the schedule that I'm supposed to go sit in the meditation room. And it becomes more an open-ended conversation between oneself and the higher powers of
Yes.
what does the present moment look like for me right now? And then the next moment, we ask the same question to ourselves.
Yeah.
And we can just let ourselves unfold.
You had this really powerful quote that I wrote down when we were speaking that is, it's not about how do I transcend the world, but how do I do the most worldly thing in the most transcendental way. Something like that. I hope I got it correctly, but that feels like it resonates a lot for me too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's about. Yeah. Yeah, like ain't nothing to transcend, like I don't want to transcend the body. I don't want to transcend my mind, because the mind is where art comes from, and where connection and friendship and relationship and a lot of beautiful things come from. And a lot of the most beautiful things I've felt have been through the sensations of my body. So I think that's just been a realization of there's nothing for me to transcend. And so that can totally be released as a goal of the practice. I think, it's like transformation over transcendence. We ideally do want to transform our lives into something that feels so beautiful and joyous and dharmic, and purposeful. But, I think of transcending, and I think of the idea of like moksha being the total freedom from the cycles of death and rebirth, or total freedom from the cycles of samsara. But, I like how the Buddhists talk about it, which is the idea of the bodhisattva. And the bodhisattva is someone who has like achieved the awakened mind, but instead of like attaining moksha and like leaving the cycles of death and rebirth and all that stuff, the bodhisattva keeps their feet on the ground in the worldly plane and chooses to help others, because just because one person attains spiritual liberation, which by the way, I definitely don't think I'm awakened or anything, but even if one person does achieve that, like there is so much work to do, and that gives us so much beautiful teachings to share with the rest of the world. So that feels even like irresponsible and inauthentic for the transcendence to even be a goal. But
I know what
yeah,
you're
I
saying.
would
Yeah.
like to live in a way that is transcendental in ways, right? I would like to transcend my own suffering. I would like to transcend the judgments in my mind. I would like to transcend my toxicity, I would
Yeah.
like to transcend my attachment styles, Um, I would like to transcend my depression, but I don't want to transcend this worldly life.
I think that what you've just shared feels so relieving in a way because I feel like a lot of these things taken out of context can feel very unattainable and very scary and like, well, why would I even start if I'm not even sure if I want that? And of course, there's an incredible amount of beautiful things that happen along the way to samadhi. Quite similarly, I always say if you're looking for a teacher to take you to samadhi, you're going to need a different teacher than me, but there's a lot of cool things along the ways that we can work on for sure. I'm curious in how, if we look at the opposite of this, right? So, right now we're talking about the acceptance of, following what feels good and what's really present for me in this moment. And then let's talk about being a yoga teacher in the context of the modern world and the social media vortex and the if you really wanted it you would just work a little harder and you would actually do it and like make it happen and stay up all night and sort of like the grind and the hustle culture which actually sucks you in even if you have the understanding and the learnings. But I want to hear from you just about that sort of paradox of because I know that you're on the social media world. I mean, we're connected because I found you on there, quite literally. So it's great that we do have this. But how do you draw the line? How do you exist in that gray area where you're not going to meditate 4 hours a day, but you're also not going to spend 40 hours a week, just like grinding away and then immediately like go and hustle on something else and without ever realizing kind of picking up your head and realizing where you're going.
Yeah. And first I want to correct you on something because you said if you're looking for samadhi, you're not the teacher for them, and I disagree because I think I will guarantee you that people have experienced the feeling of samadhi
Ah, yeah,
in your
little
classes,
samadhis. Yes, little
Yeah.
samadhis. I agree. Yes.
Yeah, we're not talking about Kaivalya. That's,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's a different
The
story,
ultimate.
but
Yes.
yeah, but samadhi, yeah, I like to think of samadhi as this thing that is like readily available and that, because like you said, these things can feel a little bit too esoteric or unattainable on the surface, but it's really just this a state of like deep connection, which I think people could feel like if someone listens to a podcast and they hear something that gives them chills or goosebumps, like that could be a form of that. So
Yes.
you're
I
you're
agree
doing
with
it. I
you.
think you definitely help people to feel that essence.
Yeah.
So, anyways, what's the question?
The social media and just the
Yeah,
question of the grind and the if you were so devoted to this path, right? Maybe you just work a little harder and then you'll get there.
r-
That kind of trap.
yeah. So let me tell you about my morning routine. I get up at 3 a.m. and then I do an ice bath
I thought you
and
were
then
being
no, yeah, no, and then I actually do 3.5 hours of Nadi Shodhana. No, I'm just kidding. Um, yeah, it's tough, and I go back and forth with social media a lot because social media has been a beautiful journey for me because it's connected me with a lot of people like yourself who I have developed real friendships with and people who I'm gonna work with and people who I'll lead retreat with and stuff. So it's been an endlessly beautiful journey that I'm very grateful for. However, it's not lost on me how unhealthy social media can be for my own mind and for other people's minds and uh, because the people who make these apps and these platforms are not doing it out of our highest service. They're doing it for their own profits and they're using our attention which our attention is like this holy sacred thing from the yogic perspective, but they're using
Yes.
that to commodify us
As
and
currency.
make
Yeah.
money. Yeah, as currency. And so uh, that's tough, but at the same time, it is still a really worthwhile tool to use in this modern world. So, um, I really, it was this year, 2025, that I started posting a lot more. And I've been kind of creating on social media for years, but I've given it a different energy this year. Which is funny because toward the end of last year, I was actually getting to this point where I'm like, I'm trying to gear up to leaving social media for good. And so I feel like
Mm.
I'm always oscillating between these two polarities of I need to be off of social media, or I really like this and I like creating and I like making content and it's connecting with me with a lot of really good people. So how does one find a healthy balance between those two polarities? I think it's up to everyone. I'm in this position now where I'm a full-time yoga teacher, so I have some of the time and energy to be able to spend making content and interacting with people. But I think for some people, they might not have that, and it might not be their highest calling to be spending time on social media. I still, through periods where I'll delete the apps for a few days just to give myself a hard reset. Um, but really, my goal with social media has always been to support my in-person offerings. And for example, I have this mentorship program that I'm starting in a couple weeks, and my goal with that is instead of just posting on social media and saying, I'm hosting a mentorship program, please sign up, pretty please,
Yeah.
this is what I'll be teaching. I would rather make content that shows people what I'm about so that if they're interested in one of my things, whether it's a mentorship or a retreat or a teacher training or a workshop, they can, because we all know everybody looks up social media, whether you're looking up like a restaurant that you're trying to go to or a yoga
Yep.
teacher that you might study with, to see what they're about, to see what the vibe is, to see what their style is, to see what their knowledge is. And so I just want people to be able to check out my page and get a feel for who I am, what I'm about, what I care about, and how I approach the practice of yoga. And so that's kind of kept me wanting to post because I don't want people to check out my social media pages and see some yoga posts from like 2020 when I knew a lot less than what I know now, or I don't want
Sure.
people to just go to my page and see me just like posting pictures from me at a club, which by the way I'm not in the clubs, but like you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
that's always been my inspiration to keep sharing and posting, is to support the in-person offerings without having to like overly market myself because I don't like it. I don't like marketing my stuff. I want to just put it out there who I am and what I'm about and what I can offer, and then those who feel aligned can come closer.
Yeah, I love that idea and that way of going about it. And yeah, I love the concept of your mentorship program too. I know we're wrapping up the interview, but I am definitely linking that in the show notes for everyone. And I would love if you could just give like a little bit about what it is and if you'll be running it again. I know it's in person, so
Yeah, so this round is in person, but I have been getting some inquiries about maybe doing it online in the future for people who don't live near me. And yeah, this program was born out of my love for working with yoga teachers and working with newer yoga teachers. Because I love teaching outside of the container of like a 60-minute asana class. I love taking time to dig deeper into the craft of teaching yoga because just like students, when they show up to a class, they're in their practice. Us as teachers, when we're teaching, we are in our practice of teaching. And
yes.
I think it's so fun to hone in on the greater details of teaching. And I think it's so fun to help other people find their own individual, unique voice. Because I'm not trying to train anybody to be another me, but I would like to help people find ways to become the best them. And
Yes.
so, yeah, this is just an opportunity for us to dive a little bit deeper into the philosophy. We're going to take a whole walk through Padas 1 and 2 of the Yoga Sutras, um, in order to try to use concepts from the traditional yoga philosophy to theme classes and weave it into people's modern lives. We'll just dive into the specificities of teaching and start to think outside the box of how we can sequence and how we can use language in ways that create the experience for our students that we're seeking to create. So really, I'm just so excited to nerd out and to have a few fellow nerds join the program, um, and I'm really grateful that there are other people that are just as excited and jazzed up about this whole yoga thing as I am, because at any given moment, I'm just ready to dive into to any rabbit hole that presents itself. So, yeah, let's get it.
I think that kind of thinking about being super intentional with understanding the language and your voice and all the things, those little details make a class for me. Like I can tell when people have intentionally and consciously put time into thinking, not just their own study of the practice and how to do the postures, but those details that you're talking about. So yeah, I
I
think that's
think
really special. I'm happy that you're doing that work.
I think, like, to your point, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I've been having fun like making these little Instagram reels about like alignment in different poses, and it's really reminding me how much I truly don't care about alignment. Like, of course I care about alignment because I'm making these videos, and I could nerd out about any asana
Yeah.
pose in the world and talk about where to put your foot in warrior two or where to reach your hand in this pose. But at the same time, no one's going to remember a class because of where you told them to put your foot in triangle pose. I mean, they
Yeah.
might actually, because we can have really good
If it's
insight
new
about
and
that.
different, yes. And it's the
Right,
perfect moment for them to hear it. Yes, I agree.
right. But those like life-changing kind of moments in our yoga practice, those moments of samadhi, is like that comes through other things. And so
Yeah.
alignment, I like to think of it as like learning a language. Like we start off by building a vocabulary and learning how to conjugate verbs and how does it actually make sense to put a sentence together. But then like once we learn all the alignment, then we're fluent and then we can play. And then when we speak, like we're having this conversation right now, it's not like we're analyzing the definition of the words and the conjugation of the verbs. We're fluent in English, so we're able to
Yeah.
just let it flow and have an experience that's a little bit less technical, a little bit less linear, and a little bit more
Yes.
holistic and spherical and uh, more open and free, right?
Yeah. So this is perfect. And from your point of view, what do you think makes an exceptional yoga teacher? What are your favorite kind of teachers to take classes from? Not that that's the only way and the best way, but just what you enjoy most.
I think anyone who loves yoga can be an exceptional yoga teacher because we can feel that. Like you can feel it when you walk into a room and the teacher just is having fun and they're present and they love yoga. And that's something I actually asked one of my teachers recently. I took one of his classes and there was a lot of space and a lot of like silence in the class, which I admired because I feel like a lot of times in a modern day flow yoga class, every moment is filled with another cue and another, tidbit or an insight. And they
Thing.
might be very amazing cues, right? Because a lot of teachers have really amazing knowledge. And I asked him, like, tell me about those periods of silence and you not saying anything because I know you could have things to share. And his answer was two words, it's presence. It's just being present with our students. And sometimes, like we say a lot as teachers, like when we're training other teachers, like, you should walk around the room and you shouldn't demo the whole class. You should be watching your students so that you can observe what kind of cues might be helpful. And so you can maybe provide a helpful adjustment. And so that you can let your students' movements kind of inform you as a teacher. And at the same time, I totally agree with that. At the same time, what if we just as a teacher like closed our eyes and breathed with the class? Like people can feel that. And that shows me that the teacher is present and that they're enjoying it and that they are really doing what they are asking us to do as well.
Yeah.
And it's not about us as a teacher. And sometimes I get caught in this too. I want to give all the most helpful cues and information because I want to be helpful, but at a certain point I have to observe myself and realize that sometimes maybe that's so I can feed my ego of wanting to portray myself as a well-informed and intelligent
Mm,
teacher.
yeah.
But if I'm teaching for the experience of the students who show up in my class, I should actually probably do a little bit less and just be
Yeah.
there with them.
That answer just blew my mind. That was one of my favorite answers to that question ever. I really love that perspective. Yeah. You can feel the presence for sure. I know one of my friends was recently in Mysore and talked so much about how every assist the teacher would breathe with her before even going in to touch her, to move her. And I was like, wow,
Mm.
what a concept to allow that space and time to actually do that. It's really special. Well, we have arrived at the final wrap up question of the interview, which is the Billboard question. And so while we have 101 more things, at least I, on my end, have 101 more things I wanted to ask you. Maybe we'll do an episode 2. I don't know. Let us know in the comments if you want a round 2. But what is, if you had a billboard that was going to be seen by everybody in the world? So we're kind of talking about the ultimate platform, right? What would you want to put on that billboard? What would be the message or the image or whatever you want to put on that billboard? What would be your billboard message?
My billboard message would be breathe. And I have an image for it in my head. I would work with some designers and some artists and maybe even some like color scientists. And I would want the billboard to just be beautiful. And I would want it to
Yeah.
maybe draw a little bit of attention in, but I would want it to feel like a massage for the brain. And I would want people to really feel like they could breathe. And I think our minds are filled with so much already. We live in this world of overstimulation and we live in a world that already has all of the most incredible, inspirational quotes out there that I honestly don't think the world needs whatever I might choose to put on a billboard. So I just want everyone to breathe and I have this like fantasy. I have this like fantasy of the whole world chanting Om together. And I feel like
Mm,
I've been saying this for like since I started teaching like 6 years ago. I'm like, what if the whole world could Om together? And I feel like it would really change the vibration of the entire planet, even if just for a moment. And I think if the whole world could collectively like close their eyes and take a deep breath together, I think that would similarly change the whole vibration of things. And we can get out of our minds because as I spoke to earlier, like our minds are where so much beautiful things come from, but our minds are also where everything like hatred and division and power and like we live in a disillusioned world where our world is run by these politicians that actually are so disconnected from the essence of what it means to be alive.
mhm.
And there are a lot of amazing politicians out there. I do want to also say that, like fighting the good fight. Um, but I think let's bring them into our circle too. Let's bring everybody from every race, ethnicity, gender, background, country, age, whatever category that anyone could ever fit into. Let's make one circle of 8 billion people and let's close our eyes and like take some deep breaths together. And I could die happy if that were to manifest. So that would seems like a logistical challenge, but
I love it. I mean, even if you're listening now, like just take a moment and visualize
Mm.
that. I feel like even just the visualization of that all together raises the frequency.
Can we do
Absolutely.
something? Can we do that? All right, so I don't
Yeah.
know how many people are listening to this show, whether it's like 7 people or like 100 or 1,000, but whatever. Like let's just sit for unless you're driving, you can close your eyes. If you're in a safe place, you can close your eyes. Maybe you notice your heartbeat. Imagine that your eyes could like settle into the sockets and take a nice full breath in. Let it go. Let's do one more breath in. Let it go. And that's That's the practice. An inhale and an exhale. That's practice and non-attachment too. We find effort in the inhale and we release it. We're non-attached from it. We let it go on the exhale. And then anyone who's listening to this podcast, we just shared that little moment. So our, we're linked. Our energy is together. We're a little bit less separate just from this little interaction. So if you're listening to this, know that, we love you. We appreciate you. You're the truth. And yeah, I'm so glad and grateful for the opportunity to come on here and connect with some new people and to share a great conversation. Thanks,
Ben, that was
grade A
amazing. Yeah.
interviewer. Such a great interviewer. Thank you for asking
This is
such thoughtful
beautiful.
questions.
Let people know where they can find you and, where they can practice with you. And I'm going to link it all in the show notes. And don't leave yet because we still have the emoji question, as that's way less profound than what we just experienced, but still of interest. So take it away.
So you can find me on Instagram at Ben Kalra. It's BenKalra. I'll probably pop up. You can find my website at ben-kalra.com, and I always update that with my offerings. I'll be leading 2 retreats in 2026 that are yet to be announced, but details are being finalized. And you can practice with me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel that's not just me, but it's like 5 or 6 of my friends who are also incredible yoga teachers, and the channel is Daily Sadhana. So it's the word daily, and then sadhana is spelled Sadhana, and you'll find us on there. We post 3 new videos every week, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I think that's kind of like how I exist on the internet.
Amazing. Thank you. And what's your favorite emoji?
Oh, I tend to use a lot of heart emojis, and I use the prayer hand emojis, classic. I think an emoji that popped into my head that maybe I don't use a lot of, but maybe I'll use more is like the head massage emoji.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Because I feel
Okay, that's
very, like,
perfect.
my brain feels good after the conversation. I feel very invigorated. So
Yeah.
let's go with that one.
Okay, that's perfect. I know, I think if you probably search in the emojis for like massage or head massage, you're going to find the one that we're talking about. Drop that in the comments on Spotify, and we'll catch you next time.
Much love.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode of the Leadership in Yoga podcast, please take a moment to drop me a rating and subscribe. Also, if you're able to share this podcast with the world, it is greatly appreciated. Thank you.